The shots come fast, 30 of them in under 30 seconds. Smoke hangs in the cold October air over a narrow vacant lot on Fremont Street. 3 men are down in the dust. A 4th staggers, clutching his arm. And for one breathless moment, the entire town of Tombstone goes silent. The saloons, the stamping mills, the piano players, every last soul on Allen Street, before the sirens of the Vizina mine begin to wail and armed miners come flooding up from underground to see what the desert has just swallowed. You think you know this story.
The strike is real.
Most people do, or think they do. 4 men in long coats, a corral, a legend stitched together by a century of dime novels and Hollywood reruns. But the real Tombstone, the one that existed before the mythology got its hands on it, was something far stranger, far richer, and far more complicated than any film has ever managed to show. It was a city that shouldn't have existed, a silver boomtown hammered into the Arizona desert at 4,500 feet above sea level, 30 miles from the Mexican border, in a landscape so hostile that a U.S. Army scout once told its founder he was going to find nothing out there but his own tombstone. The man took the warning as a name instead. And in doing so, he built one of the most extraordinary places in American history. This is Tombstone, 1881, the year it burned, the year it bled, and the year it became something the world would never quite let go of. The story begins, as so many Western stories do, with a single stubborn man in a vast, empty landscape. Ed Schieffelin arrived in the San Pedro Valley in 1877, a prospector's pickaxe on his shoulder and nothing in his pockets but optimism. The U.S. Army soldiers stationed at nearby Fort Huachuca thought he was out of his mind. Apache raids were frequent. Water was scarce. The terrain was brutal.
You are walking into a hell of a fight.
Go out there, one of them told him, and the only stone you'll find is your tombstone. Schieffelin went anyway. In the rocky hills southwest of the valley, he found silver, enormous quantities of it, in ore bodies he named Tombstone and Lucky Cuss, because that is exactly what he was. Within 2 years, the town had materialized around those mines as if summoned from the desert itself. By 1879, lots on Allen Street were selling for $5 each. By 1880, the population had surpassed 1,000. By 1881, depending on which count you trust and which residents you bothered to include, and most official tallies did not include women, children, Chinese or Mexican residents, Tombstone was home to somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 people. It was growing faster than San Francisco had in the gold rush years. It was, for one extraordinary window of time, the largest city in the entire Arizona territory. Stand on Allen Street in the spring of 1881 and try to hold the full picture in your mind. The street itself is unpaved, a broad ribbon of caliche dust that turns to ankle-deep mud when the monsoon rains arrive and coats everything in a fine white powder the rest of the time. The buildings lining it are a mix of adobe and raw timber, thrown up fast and replaced faster, some with false fronts that make them look taller than they are, a kind of architectural bluffing that suited the place perfectly. The sound is relentless. The rhythmic percussion of the stamp mills working the silver ore on the edges of town, the tinny roll of a piano spilling out of an open saloon door, the creak of wagon wheels on the ruts, the shouts of a vendor selling fresh oysters shipped up from Baja California on ice. Because yes, Tombstone had refrigerated fresh seafood delivered daily in the middle of the Sonoran Desert in 1881. That detail stops most people cold, and it should. Because Tombstone was not, by any reasonable measure, the rough, backward outpost that its mythology insists upon. By mid-1881, the city had a telephone exchange, one of the first in the entire Southwest. It had gas street lamps, a telegraph line, 2 banks, 3 newspapers, 4 churches, an opera house, and an ice cream parlor. It had restaurants staffed by chefs recruited from New York, St. Louis, and Chicago, where a gentleman could order from a menu that included French cuisine, fresh shellfish, and 26 varieties of imported wine. The Crystal Palace Saloon boasted a 45-foot mahogany bar and chandelier lighting. The Oriental offered piano and violin concerts every night. It also had, by official count, 110 liquor licenses, which, for a city of its size, comes out to roughly 1 drinking establishment per 90 residents, a ratio that even the most optimistic modern bartender might find daunting. The workforce powering all of this was largely immigrant, Cornish, Irish, and German miners who descended hundreds of feet into the earth each shift, working by candlelight in narrow tunnels, pulling silver ore from the rock at wages of $4 a day. It was dangerous, grinding labor, and the men who did it spent their earnings with considerable enthusiasm on Allen Street every evening. The divide between the men who worked underground and the men who managed the investments was stark and permanent. Eastern financiers had bought controlling interests in most of the major mines by 1880, and the profits flowed back east just as surely as the ore came up from below. Meanwhile, beyond the city limits, a different economy was operating. The cowboys, not a romantic term in 1881, but a specific name for a loosely organized network of rustlers, stagecoach robbers, and Confederate sympathizers who operated across the border country, had been working the region long before Tombstone existed. They ran stolen cattle up from Sonora, Mexico, fenced them in the territory, and used Tombstone's saloons and hotels as their off-hours base. The town was politically divided between factions, and that division ran deeper than most gunfight narratives acknowledge. It was a split between Republican-aligned business interests and Democratic-leaning ranching and rustling communities, between Eastern capital and frontier independence, between the rule of law as an abstract principle and the practical reality of who actually enforced it out here, 30 miles from the nearest federal presence. Into this tension walked 5 brothers named Earp: Virgil, Wyatt, Morgan, Warren, and James, arriving in stages between 1879 and 1880. Virgil came first and became deputy marshal. Wyatt worked the gambling tables and briefly held a deputy sheriff position. They aligned themselves with the Reform faction, with city marshal authority and the backing of the business community. And they locked almost immediately into a grinding, escalating conflict with the Clanton family, the McClory brothers, and the wider cowboy network that had been running this territory on its own terms long before any lawman arrived to complicate matters. The collision had been building for months. Stolen horses, disputed stagecoach robberies, midnight threats delivered in saloon doorways, before it finally arrived on the cold afternoon of October 26, 1881. The confrontation did not take place inside the OK Corral. That detail has been wrong since almost the beginning. It happened in a narrow, empty lot on Fremont Street, 1 block away, between the Harwood House and Fly's photography studio, and it lasted, by most reconstructions, approximately 30 seconds. 30 shots were fired. Billy Clanton, Frank McClory, and Tom McClory did not survive. Virgil, Morgan, and Doc Holliday were wounded. Wyatt Earp walked away without a scratch, a fact that would haunt his legacy for the rest of his long life. The legal aftermath was almost as chaotic as the fight itself. A formal hearing before Justice Wells Spicer ran for a month and ultimately cleared the Earp party of wrongdoing, ruling that they had acted in their duty as law officers. The cowboys and their allies never accepted that verdict. In December 1881, Virgil Earp was ambushed on Allen Street, his left arm shattered by a shotgun blast so severe he would never fully recover its use. In March 1882, Morgan was shot and fell across a billiard table in Campbell and Hatch's saloon. Wyatt went after the men responsible in a campaign the newspapers called the Vendetta Ride, then left Arizona Territory and never returned. Tombstone endured. It survived two catastrophic fires, the first in June 1881, when a lit cigar ignited a whiskey barrel in the arcade saloon and took 66 businesses with it, and the second in May 1882, when a blaze starting on 5th Street consumed over 100 structures and caused an estimated $700,000 in damage, far exceeding any available insurance. Both times, the town rebuilt within months because the silver was still there. Then the water came. The mines had been fighting groundwater since 1881, running enormous Cornish pumps day and night to keep the shafts clear. At their peak, those pumps were moving 2.5 million gallons of water out of the earth every single day. When fire destroyed the pump house at the Grand Central Mine in 1886, the mines flooded within weeks. The silver was still in the rock. There was simply no practical way to reach it anymore. By 1890, the census found fewer than 2,000 people left in a city that had held 10 times that number less than a decade before. The Birdcage Theatre, which the New York Times had once called the wildest and wickedest night spot between New Orleans and San Francisco, closed its doors. The saloons went quiet. The stamp mills fell still. The dust settled over Allen Street like a slow exhale, and the desert began very gradually to reclaim what had been taken from it. But Tombstone did not disappear. It became something else, a monument to its own brief, furious existence. The buildings stayed standing. The street grid held. The Tombstone Epitaph newspaper, founded in 1880, kept printing. And slowly, the mythology grew around the bones of the place, magnifying certain moments and burying others, until the name Tombstone meant something far larger than any actual 30-second gunfight could ever justify. What the mythology never quite captures is the texture of the thing. The oysters on ice, the chandelier in a saloon, the telephone wires being strung through the desert in 1881, the Cornish miners going underground at dawn, the 26 kinds of imported wine, the stamp mills shaking the earth at 3 in the morning, the dust that settled on everything and everyone and refused to let go. That was Tombstone. Not just a gunfight, a whole impossible world, built in the desert on the strength of silver and ambition, and gone almost before anyone could say they had truly seen it. If you want the history that actually happened, not the legend, not the myth, but the real, complicated, extraordinary thing, then you are already in exactly the right place. Subscribe to History Recreated, turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, and tell us in the comments which piece of Tombstone's story surprised you most. We read everything you send us, and we will see you in the next one.